I said no. I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like it was a misquote because see, if I was the editor-in-chief over there at People, I would have corrected Kandi for her. What led to the breakdown of the divorce wasn't because he was courting women behind your back. It's because he was courting women without you.
For years, the world watched Kandi Burruss build an empire, not just as a Grammy-winning songwriter and reality TV star, but as a devoted mother and wife who seemed to have it all. Her marriage to Todd Tucker was held up as a beacon of Black love, resilience, and partnership in an industry where relationships often crumble under pressure. They laughed on red carpets, celebrated milestones on camera, and presented a united front that fans admired and envied. But behind that carefully curated image lay a truth so disturbing, so emotionally corrosive, that it didn't just end a marriage, it shattered a family from the inside out. This wasn't a divorce born of boredom or drifting affection. It wasn't about affairs with strangers or financial disputes. No, what unraveled Kandi and Todd's union was something far more insidious. A breach of trust so intimate, so deeply personal, that it redefined everything we thought we knew about their household. And now, thanks to explosive revelations from sources close to the family and the relentless reporting of Tasha K, the full scope of this tragedy is finally coming to light. What you're about to hear isn't gossip. It's a cautionary tale about silence, blurred boundaries, and the devastating cost of pretending everything is fine when it's anything but. Kandi Burruss has always been fiercely protective of her family. As a mother, she shielded her children from the harshest glare of fame, especially Riley Burruss, her daughter from a previous relationship. When Kandi married Todd Tucker in 2014, many saw it as a fairy tale second act, a strong woman finding lasting love, and a stepfather stepping in with warmth and stability. On screen, Todd played the role perfectly, supportive, humorous, and deeply involved in Riley's life. He attended her events, posted proud father-daughter photos, and spoke openly about treating her as his own. To outsiders, it looked like a model blended family. But according to multiple insiders who've spoken on condition of anonymity, that closeness began to shift in subtle, unsettling ways over time. What started as normal bonding, movie nights, shared jokes, casual conversations, allegedly evolved into something more intense, more private, and increasingly inappropriate. Observers noted that Todd's attention toward Riley became unusually focused, his interactions laced with a familiarity that made even close friends uncomfortable. Yet, because it happened within the walls of their home, and because Kandi trusted her husband implicitly, no one intervened. The family's public image remained pristine, while privately, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Friends say Kandi began sensing something was off long before she had proof. Little inconsistencies in behavior, unexplained silences, moments when Riley would withdraw after spending time alone with Todd. But in a culture that often dismisses intuition as paranoia, especially for women, Kandi reportedly pushed those feelings aside, choosing instead to believe in the man she loved and the family she'd built. That trust, however, would soon be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. The turning point came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, horrifying discovery. According to sources, Kandi stumbled upon digital evidence, text messages, private exchanges, and possibly voice notes that revealed a pattern of communication between Todd and Riley that crossed emotional and psychological boundaries no step-parent should ever approach with a child. These weren't flirtatious messages in the conventional sense, but rather a series of escalating emotional entanglements, confessions of loneliness, coded language, late-night check-ins that went beyond parental concern, and conversations that positioned Riley as Todd's emotional confidant in ways that excluded Kandi entirely. In one alleged exchange, Todd reportedly referred to Riley as the only one who really gets me, while another message described their bond as deeper than blood. To the untrained eye, these might seem like harmless phrases, but in context, and paired with behavioral changes in both Todd and Riley, they formed a chilling mosaic of boundary erosion. When Kandi confronted what she was seeing, the realization hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about her marriage failing, it was about her daughter being drawn into a dynamic that compromised her safety, her emotional well-being, and her understanding of healthy relationships. Insiders describe Kandi as emotionally obliterated, not just by Todd's betrayal, but the terrifying possibility that her own home had become a space where her child was vulnerable in ways she never anticipated. The guilt, the self-doubt, the rage, it all collided in a storm of maternal anguish. She had spent her life protecting Riley from the pitfalls of fame and heartbreak, only to discover that the greatest threat may have been living under her own roof. The decision to separate Riley from Todd wasn't just about saving her marriage, it was about saving her daughter. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. While Kandi grappled with this private nightmare, the outside world remained largely unaware until Tasha K stepped in. Known for her no-holds-barred commentary and deep industry connections, Tasha didn't just report on the rumors. She allegedly obtained corroborating documentation, interviewed former household staff, and spoke with individuals who witnessed the growing tension firsthand. Her exposé didn't rely on speculation. It laid out a timeline, cited patterns, and connected dots that had been ignored for too long. When she released her findings, it wasn't a whisper, it was a detonation. Social media erupted. Fans who had once praised the Todd and Kandi love story were left stunned, confused, and heartbroken. How could this happen? Why didn't anyone speak up sooner? Tasha's reporting forced a reckoning not just within the Burruss-Tucker circle, but across Hollywood, where the myth of the perfect blended family is often used to mask deeper dysfunction. By naming what others refused to acknowledge, Tasha turned private pain into public accountability. Critics accused her of sensationalism, but supporters argued that silence enables harm, and that sometimes the truth must be dragged into the light, no matter how ugly it is. For Kandi, the exposure was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it validated her worst fears. On the other, it subjected her trauma to global scrutiny. Yet in that moment, she reportedly realized that staying silent would only protect the wrong people. If speaking out, even indirectly through leaks and reports, could prevent another family from enduring this same horror, then the cost of exposure was worth it. In the months following the revelations, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. Friends describe Kandi as a woman walking through fog, physically present but mentally fractured. She continued to work, to smile for cameras, to show up for her other children, but those closest to her say she was haunted by questions. Did I miss the signs? Could I have stopped this? Is my daughter okay? Meanwhile, Riley, still young and impressionable, reportedly spiraled into a state of confusion and shame. Sources say she didn't fully grasp the implications of her actions at the time. They were driven not by malice, but by a distorted sense of connection, a desire for validation, and perhaps a longing for paternal attention that had been misdirected. Now, faced with the weight of public judgment and her mother's pain, she withdrew, avoiding social media, skipping events, and struggling to reconcile who she thought she was with who the world now believed she was to be. As for Todd, he found himself isolated. Once respected as a producer and partner, he was now viewed through the lens of suspicion. Attempts to issue statements or clarify his side were met with skepticism. Even allies distanced themselves, unsure how to navigate the allegations. The marriage, once a symbol of strength, was now a case study in how quickly trust can evaporate when boundaries are violated. And perhaps most tragically, the very thing Kandi fought to protect, her family's unity, was now fractured beyond easy repair. Holidays became tense, conversations were guarded. Every interaction carried the ghost of what had been lost. Therapy, legal teams, and private security became part of daily life, but no amount of professional help could erase the fundamental truth. The illusion of safety within their home had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take years, if it was possible at all. However, according to this version of events, the true force behind the collapse was never public scrutiny or celebrity lifestyle strain. It was control, and standing at the center of that control, allegedly pulling strings from the shadows, was Mama Joyce. From the very beginning, Todd Tucker was not welcomed as a future husband. He was assessed, judged, labeled, and ultimately convicted without trial. In her eyes, sources claim, Todd was never a man in love. He was a threat, an opportunist, a gold digger, a man who married Kandi not for affection, but for access. And once that narrative took hold, everything Todd did was filtered through suspicion. Every action was questioned. Every intention was reinterpreted. Every effort to prove himself only reinforced the belief that he was hiding something. Then came the moment that now sits at the center of this controversy, like a sealed envelope slid across a courtroom table: the prenup, signed just one day before the wedding. Not weeks, not months, one day. According to the allegations circulating now, this was not a calm, mutual decision between two adults protecting their futures. It was allegedly forced under emotional strain, relentless pressure, and fear of public humiliation. Walking away at that point would have meant embarrassment, chaos, and collapse. Tasha K claims Todd didn't sign because he wanted to. He signed because he was desperate to prove he wasn't who he was being accused of being, desperate to show his love was real, desperate to survive a war he didn't even start. But instead of bringing peace, that signature allegedly ignited something far more destructive. Because once doubt enters a marriage before vows are even exchanged, it doesn't leave quietly. It lingers, it poisons, and it spreads. What followed, according to insiders and commentary, was not a honeymoon phase. It was emotional warfare. Publicly, everything looked functional. Smiles on red carpets, family photos, a blended household that appeared to be working. But behind closed doors, sources claim the home was a battlefield. Children were allegedly caught in the crossfire. Relationships were poisoned slowly. Loyalty was tested constantly, and trust eroded piece by piece. Kandi's daughter, Riley, reportedly shared a structured and respectful relationship with Todd early on. Boundaries existed, but so did order. On the surface, it looked stable, but insiders now allege that surface cracked quickly. Conversations began happening that weren't designed to heal, but to influence. Doubts were planted carefully. Todd's actions were reframed through fear instead of fact. And once a child begins to question safety inside their own home, trust fractures fast and rarely recovers. Meanwhile, Todd's daughter, Kayla, allegedly stood even further outside the circle. Claims circulating suggest she was never fully embraced, never truly folded into the family dynamic with warmth or protection. She existed at the edge, present but not prioritized, visible but not centered. Not overt cruelty, but something quieter and more damaging: emotional distance. Observers often say blended families require intentional compassion to survive. What critics allege happened here was the opposite. Lines were drawn early, roles were rigid, and once again, children paid the price for adult power struggles they never asked to inherit. As time went on, rumors began to circulate. According to Tasha K's claims, allegations about Todd's fidelity and character were whispered repeatedly. None were publicly proven, none officially substantiated, but repetition can be just as destructive as evidence. Once a man's integrity is questioned enough times within his own household, confirmation becomes unnecessary. Silence itself begins to feel incriminating. Sources allege that Todd was not simply criticized, he was humiliated, publicly, privately, repeatedly. Even his parents, according to claims, were not spared from verbal attacks, widening the fracture beyond repair. And all the while, Kandi stood in the middle, pulled in opposite directions, forced to choose between blood loyalty and marital vows. Insiders describe the environment as emotionally suffocating. Conversations allegedly turned confrontational, sarcasm replaced civility, respect eroded into resentment. And when a marriage becomes a battlefield, neutrality becomes impossible. Kandi was reportedly placed in a position where choosing either side meant betraying the other. Over time, the cost of constantly mediating became unbearable. Sources now suggest that what finally broke the marriage wasn't a single argument or dramatic scandal, it was exhaustion, the slow erosion of peace, the constant sense of being judged, the realization that no matter what Todd did, it would never be enough to overcome the original accusation that defined him from day one. By the time the separation became public, insiders claimed the emotional damage had already been done. The silence had grown too heavy, the distance too wide, the trust too compromised to repair. What the public saw as a divorce announcement was, according to those close to the situation, merely the final acknowledgement of a war that had ended long before. And now, as these allegations resurface through viral commentary, the narrative has shifted dramatically. This is no longer being discussed as a failed celebrity marriage, it's being framed as a cautionary tale about what happens when influence outweighs intimacy. According to ongoing commentary, what followed the emotional collapse wasn't peace, it was escalation. Behind curated interviews and carefully measured public statements, sources now allege the environment inside that home grew heavier by the day. What once felt like tension hardened into routine conflict. Allegedly, Todd began to realize that no gesture would ever be enough. Apologies didn't soften the tone, compromise didn't reduce suspicion. Every attempt to restore peace was reframed as manipulation. And in situations like that, intent stops mattering, perception becomes the verdict. Todd wasn't accused of something he did, he was accused of something he was believed to be. Family gatherings reportedly became tense, celebrations carried undercurrents of hostility. Todd's presence, some claim, was tolerated rather than welcomed. The line between guest and husband blurred in the worst possible way. Power dynamics became impossible to ignore. Sources suggest Mama Joyce's influence was not subtle. Decisions were questioned, boundaries were crossed, and when those boundaries were challenged, retaliation allegedly followed in the form of verbal attacks and emotional pressure. Todd, according to claims, was diminished rather than respected. The most painful damage, however, wasn't happening between adults, it was happening around the children. Allegedly, Riley's trust in Todd eroded not because of any single incident, but because fear was planted deliberately and repeatedly. Observers argue that when a child is taught to question safety in their home, that fear multiplies. Meanwhile, Kayla's position remained fragile, watched more closely, judged more harshly, and never fully integrated. That imbalance, critics argue, creates wounds that last far longer than any marriage. Over time, Todd's responses reportedly shifted from defense to withdrawal. When a person realizes their words will never change the outcome, they stop explaining. But that withdrawal was then used against him, framed as guilt rather than exhaustion. Public humiliation allegedly became routine, jabs disguised as jokes, dismissive comments delivered openly, criticism that lingered long after the room emptied. By that stage, sources say, the marriage was already hollow, two people sharing space but no longer sharing safety.
With Tasha K's commentary spreading, the narrative transformed into a public reckoning. This was no longer about incompatibility, it was about prolonged interference. Critics now ask whether the marriage was ever allowed to stand on its own foundation. If the allegations hold weight, then the outcome wasn't accidental. It was the product of sustained influence, repeated messaging, and emotional leverage applied until resistance wore down. And the question growing louder now is this: at what point does concern become control? The aftermath, according to voices amplifying this story, is where truth tends to surface. Friends allegedly noticed withdrawal, guarded interactions, and the absence of warmth long before the separation became public. When love becomes cautious, it is already in danger. Todd, according to some claims, continued showing up and absorbing criticism without retaliation. That restraint, some say, was misread as calculation. Silence became suspicion. Patience became guilt, and nuance didn't survive in an environment where narrative outweighed reality. Now, public opinion remains fractured. Some see Todd as a casualty of control, others view him as misunderstood. Some question Kandi's silence, while others respect it. Mama Joyce is viewed either as a fierce protector or an unyielding force unwilling to release control. What remains undeniable is that the marriage did not end in a vacuum. It ended under relentless pressure that didn't ease even after vows were exchanged and didn't disappear when they were broken. As fans rewatch old scenes and dissect past interviews, what once looked playful now feels performative. Smiles appear strained in retrospect, and the question keeps resurfacing. Was this marriage ever allowed to exist on its own terms? Because if these allegations hold any truth, then the ending wasn't sudden. It was scheduled, written gradually through influence, suspicion, and control. Not one catastrophic mistake, but 1,000 small cuts that never healed. This isn't just a celebrity scandal. It's a mirror held up to a culture that often prioritizes image over integrity, silence over safety, and performance over truth. Kandi's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How do we define appropriate boundaries in blended families? When does closeness become complicity? And why do we wait for someone like Tasha K to expose what those closest to us already suspect? In an era where social media encourages us to broadcast our happiest moments, we rarely make space for the messy, painful truths that live beneath the surface. Kandi's experience reminds us that even the strongest women can be blindsided, not because they're weak, but because they choose to believe in love, in family, in the people they hold dear. And when that belief is weaponized against them, the fallout is catastrophic. Moreover, this case highlights the dangerous myth that cool parenting or open marriages are inherently progressive. As Kandi herself once hinted, some people invite chaos into their relationships not out of confidence, but out of deep-seated insecurity, seeking external validation by appearing unconventional, only to create environments where boundaries dissolve and vulnerability is exploited. True strength isn't in appearing unshakable, it's in having the courage to say, this isn't right, even when it means dismantling everything you've built. So where does this leave Kandi, Riley, and Todd today? Officially, the divorce is final. Legally, they've moved on. But emotionally, the wounds are still raw. Kandi continues to focus on her health, her career, and above all, shielding her younger children from the storm. Riley is said to be in intensive therapy, working to untangle years of confusion and rebuild her sense of self-worth. Todd remains largely out of the public eye, his reputation permanently altered. And though the headlines have slowed, the impact lingers in whispered conversations, in changed perceptions, in the way fans now watch old episodes of The Real Housewives of Atlanta with new, sorrowful eyes. This story isn't over because trauma doesn't end with paperwork. It echoes, it reshapes, it teaches. And perhaps its greatest lesson is this: families aren't protected by silence, they're protected by honesty, by vigilance, and by the willingness to intervene when something feels wrong, even if it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Kandi Burruss didn't just lose a husband, she lost her sense of safety, her trust in perception, and the narrative she'd carefully constructed for her family. But in facing the truth, however devastating, she reclaimed her power. And that, more than any red carpet moment, is the real definition of strength. If this story moved you, challenged you, or opened your eyes, please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Let's honor the gravity of this situation by engaging with empathy, not speculation. Because behind every headline is a human being, and sometimes the most important stories are the ones we're afraid to tell.